You think debates get heated? Think again. When Jasmine Crockett faced President Trump live on stage, she didn't just challenge him, she flipped his own words back at him. What happened next left the entire room frozen in disbelief, and by the end you might find yourself cheering too. The stage was set. Bright lights burned down from above, casting a glow across the polished table where the night's most important conversation was about to unfold. The cameras were already rolling, little red dots blinking like watchful eyes capturing every twitch, every breath, every word. At first glance, it looked like any other political panel. The host sat in the middle, shuffling papers, his voice calm as he introduced the guests. A small audience filled the studio seats, quiet, expectant, notebooks in hand. Everything felt organized, controlled, almost peaceful. And that peace is exactly what made the air feel so charged, because peace like that never lasts. There, at the center of it all, sat Representative Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't shifting in her chair, fumbling with notes or rushing to get words out. She sat upright, her hands folded neatly in front of her, dressed sharp but simple, confident without needing to show off. Her eyes were steady, her voice smooth, every word landing with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she wanted to say. When Jasmine spoke, the room leaned in. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't attacking anyone. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke directly into the camera, directly to the people at home, with a kind of clarity that was impossible to ignore. "Here's the truth," she began, her tone measured. "This bill being pushed right now is going to hurt the very people it claims to help. Millions of working families are going to feel the weight of this, not tomorrow, not years from now, but immediately." The way she said it made you listen, even if you didn't want to. She walked the audience step by step through what the bill meant. Higher cost for groceries, less money in paychecks, more pressure on families already struggling to make ends meet. She didn't hide behind jargon. She didn't bury her message in big words. She made it simple, so simple that even someone who had never followed politics could understand exactly what she was saying. You could see the effect on the audience. Heads nodding, pens scribbling, people exchanging glances as if to say, "She's right." And through it all, Jasmine never rushed. She wasn't fiery. She wasn't desperate. She was calm, deliberate, almost soothing, like a teacher in front of a classroom, breaking down a complicated subject until everyone understood. At one point, she paused, letting her words hang in the air before continuing. The silence wasn't awkward, it was powerful. She used it like a tool, giving people a moment to absorb what she had just said. "This isn't about left or right," she continued. "It's about fairness. It's about whether working people get a chance to breathe or whether they're pushed harder until they break." The host leaned forward, clearly impressed. Even the camera operators, usually mechanical in their movements, seemed to hold steady, unwilling to cut away from her face. It was the kind of moment that doesn't come often in debates. A rare calm where someone, just for a second, cuts through the noise and actually makes sense of it all. But behind that calm, you could feel something brewing. Because on the far end of the table, President Donald Trump sat with his arms crossed, watching. His expression was hard to read, part annoyance, part calculation. He wasn't used to being sidelined, wasn't used to someone else commanding the spotlight so easily. His daughter Ivanka sat nearby, her gaze fixed on Jasmine, her polished composure hiding whatever thoughts raced through her mind. The cameras hadn't cut to them yet, but everyone in the studio could feel it. The tension building. Second by second, Trump's fingers tapped the table. A small sound, almost lost under Jasmine's calm voice, but enough to signal that something was coming. Ivanka shifted in her chair, leaning slightly toward her father, as if to brace for the moment they both knew was inevitable. And that's what made Jasmine's calm so striking. Because while the storm was forming across the table, she didn't flinch. She didn't stumble. She kept her focus, her voice steady, explaining exactly how this bill would squeeze families tighter, how promises made during campaigns didn't match the reality people were about to face. For a few minutes, it felt like she had pulled the whole room into her rhythm. The audience, the host, even the cameras, all locked on her, following her words like a thread. But in the corner of your eye, you could see it. Trump's restlessness, his shoulders shifting, his jaw tightening, the way he leaned forward ever so slightly as though he couldn't sit still any longer. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the calm shattered. And then, it did. The shift was sudden, sharp. Trump leaned forward, his presence filling the space like a wave crashing through a quiet shore. Even the host looked startled, his eyes darting between Jasmine and the president. And then Trump's voice boomed, breaking through Jasmine's measured calm like a hammer smashing glass. "She's not even American." The words struck the studio like lightning. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The air itself seemed to freeze, heavy, suffocating. Even the camera operator hesitated, unsure whether to zoom in on Jasmine or on Trump. The calm was gone. The storm had arrived, and Jasmine, sitting there under the harsh lights, every eye in the room fixed on her, was about to face it head-on. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "She's not even American." For a moment, no one breathed. No one moved. The studio, buzzing only seconds before, fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The kind of silence that presses on your chest and makes you feel like time itself has stopped. The audience froze in their seats. The host blinked rapidly as if his brain couldn't process what had just been said. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, caught between pointing at the president's red, defiant face or at Jasmine Crockett, the woman he had just accused of not belonging to her own country. And yet, Jasmine didn't flinch, she didn't slam the table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look startled. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to show she'd heard every word, and then, in a voice that was calm, too calm, she asked, "That's a very big accusation. Mr. President, can you show proof of that right now?" The room shifted. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire across the studio. The President of the United States had just thrown out a charge so heavy it could crush a career. And Jasmine had done the unthinkable. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't folded. She had thrown it back in his face with a single steady question. "Proof," she said again, leaning just slightly forward. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. Every syllable cut sharp. "Do you have it?" For a split second, Trump hesitated. His eyes darted. His lips tightened. And then he slammed his palm against the desk, the sound cracking through the silence like a whip. "She's not American," he barked. "She doesn't represent you." The audience gasped again. Some looked at each other in disbelief. Others shook their heads, waiting for more, waiting for the evidence that never came. Still, no proof. Just louder words. Jasmine didn't rush to respond. She let the silence stretch again, let Trump's words echo around the room, sounding weaker and weaker with every second that passed, without a single fact to back them up. And then, finally, she spoke. Her tone steady, her words deliberate. "You just told millions of people I don't belong here. Now prove it." The camera zoomed in. You could see the tension in Trump's jaw, the slight twitch of his hand on the table, the way his shoulders squared as if bracing for impact. He repeated himself again, louder, sharper, but every time, the accusation sounded thinner. And then came the moment no one expected. Trump leaned forward, jabbing his finger through the air, pointing straight at Jasmine. His voice dropped lower, harsher, and the words slashed through the quiet. "Look at her. Does she look like someone who represents America to you?" The gasp this time was different, sharper, angrier. A wave of murmurs rolled across the audience. The host's eyes widened. Even Ivanka, seated nearby, stiffened, her carefully composed face breaking for just a fraction of a second. But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink under his words. She sat there perfectly still, letting the weight of his sentence hang heavy in the air. And then, after a long, unbearable pause, she spoke. "Mr. President," she said, her voice calm but firm, "what you just said is why so many Americans feel unheard. You didn't attack my ideas. You attacked my skin. That's racism, plain and simple." The words hit the room like a strike of lightning. The silence cracked, this time with scattered applause. Someone in the back whispered a sharp, "Yes." A few people nodded vigorously, their faces lit with fire. The air had shifted again, and now the energy was moving toward Jasmine, not away from her. Trump's face tightened. His jaw clenched. His voice, once booming, now trembled just slightly with anger. "You're twisting my words," he snapped. "I didn't mean," but Jasmine cut him off. Not with volume, not with shouting, but with a clarity that drowned out everything else. "You meant exactly what you said, and the whole country just heard it." The host swallowed hard. caught between jumping in and staying out of what was quickly becoming the most explosive moment of the night. Ivanka shifted in her chair again, her lips pressed tight as though she was silently urging her father to stop. But Jasmine wasn't done. She leaned forward, just enough to make her presence undeniable. Her voice dropped lower, steadier, like a blade pressed to the table. I was born here. I grew up here. My family's story is woven into this country's story. And when you say I don't belong, you're not just talking about me. You're talking about millions of people who look like me, who sound like me, who love this country just as much as anyone else. The audience erupted into louder applause now. Not polite claps, but sharp, urgent, passionate. Trump's face grew redder. He waved his hand, trying to dismiss her words, but Jasmine pressed harder. You tried to erase me with a sentence, but sentences don't erase people. Truth does. And the truth is, I am American. And your refusal to show proof says more about you than it ever will about me. The crowd leaned forward, caught in the pull of her words. The cameras cut between Jasmine's unshaken face and Trump's fuming silence. And then Jasmine delivered one final line, her voice steady enough to echo long after it left her lips. America doesn't look like one man. It looks like all of us. And you can't erase that, not with words, not with anger, not with power. The audience erupted, clapping. Shouts of agreement. The sound filled the studio, washing over the stage in a wave of energy. Trump sat back, his jaw tight, his face hard, his words gone. And in that silence, everyone knew it, the power in the room had shifted. The studio was electric. Jasmine had just finished dismantling Trump's accusation, and the audience could feel it. The shift in energy, the change in momentum. The president, the man known for always having the loudest voice in the room, was suddenly on the defensive, and yet, he wasn't backing down. Trump leaned forward again, his tone sharper, harsher, his finger jabbing through the air as if each thrust could puncture the strength of Jasmine's words. She doesn't belong here, he roared. She's not fit to represent this country. The audience gasped. Some booed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But Jasmine? She remained steady, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her expression calm, almost unnervingly so. She let him yell. She let the noise fill the studio. And then when the sound began to taper, she leaned forward just slightly, her voice smooth, sharp, deliberate. If we're going to talk about who belongs where, Mr. President, she said, pausing just long enough for the tension to spike, then maybe we should start with your family. The air cracked. Every eye in the room snapped toward her. Even the host froze, blinking rapidly, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. Trump's eyes narrowed, his chin lifting slightly in defiance. What did you just say? He demanded. Jasmine didn't blink, didn't waver. You and Ivanka, she said slowly, each word dropping like a weight, are the biological parents of Barron. The floor fell out from under the room. Gasps erupted across the studio. The host's mouth dropped open. A woman in the back row clapped a hand over her mouth. Even the camera operator jolted, the lens shaking for a brief, unsteady second before regaining focus. Trump's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time all night, the man who prided himself on having a quick comeback had nothing to say. But Jasmine wasn't done. Calmly, almost casually, she reached beneath the desk and pulled out a thin folder. She held it up just high enough for the cameras to zoom in. These, she said, her tone measured, deliberate, are documents that raise serious questions about Barron's parentage. Medical records, timelines, details your team has never addressed. The audience erupted again. Gasps, whispers, a low hum of disbelief. Some leaned forward in their seats, desperate to catch every word. Others simply sat frozen, their faces pale with shock. Trump snapped out of his silence, his voice booming, desperate. That's ridiculous. Total fake news. You're lying. But the crack in his voice gave him away. The audience heard it. The cameras caught it. Jasmine noticed it. And instead of raising her voice, instead of fighting fire with fire, she leaned back in her chair ever so slightly, her calmness only highlighting his unraveling. If it's false, she said softly, almost soothingly, then prove it. Right here. Right now. You're the president. You have every resource at your disposal. Show us the truth. Trump tried to laugh, but the sound was forced, hollow, brittle, the kind of laugh a man gives when he's cornered and can't find the exit. The audience murmured again, their whispers growing sharper, more urgent. The tension was unbearable. every eye flicking between Trump's reddening face and Jasmine's calm, steady gaze. And then Jasmine twisted the knife. "This isn't just about Barron," she continued. "This is about power, about transparency, about why your daughter Ivanka holds more influence in your administration than the First Lady herself, why she's sitting in meetings with world leaders speaking on behalf of this country, when no daughter in history has ever been given that authority." The studio erupted in noise, gasps, murmurs, nervous laughter. The audience couldn't believe what they were hearing. But Jasmine wasn't finished. "You want to talk about belonging, Mr. President?" she asked, her tone sharp as steel. "Then explain why Ivanka has been treated like the real First Lady, while Melania has been pushed into the background." Trump waved his hand frantically, his voice rising. "You're making this up, all of it. Conspiracy theories, fake." But every word sounded weaker, more desperate, his usual confidence slipping like sand through his fingers. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't falter. She didn't even raise her voice. "You once said on national television that if Ivanka weren't your daughter, you'd be dating her," she said evenly. "You smiled when you said it. You said it again in a magazine interview, praising her looks in a way no father should. And now you expect us to believe her influence in your White House is just coincidence?" The room exploded. Some gasped. Some laughed nervously. Others clapped. The host tried to interject, raising a hand. But the noise was too strong, the energy too explosive to contain. Trump tried to shout over it all, his voice booming, insisting it was just a joke, insisting no one took it seriously. But the audience wasn't laughing with him anymore, they were laughing at him. And Jasmine, she just sat there, calm, steady, letting his words hang in the air before cutting through them with her final strike. "You can joke about dating your daughter," she said, her voice low, powerful, resonant, "but you can't joke about my identity as an American. You can't erase my belonging with a sentence, and you can't bury these questions by yelling." The line hit like a thunderclap. The audience erupted into cheers. Some stood. Others clapped wildly, their voices rising above the chaos. Trump sat frozen, his face red, his jaw tight, his usual bluster shattered under the weight of Jasmine's calm defiance. And in that moment, everyone knew. Jasmine Crockett had turned the tables. The president wasn't the one in control anymore, she was. The room was no longer just tense, it was volatile. The bombshell had already been dropped, and the studio felt like it was balancing on a knife's edge. Every breath, every movement carried weight. The cameras were locked in, the lights hot and glaring, and the audience sat frozen, unwilling to miss a single second. Trump's face burned red, his jaw tight, his fists clenching the table in front of him. This wasn't the polished, confident leader his supporters were used to seeing. This was something different. Something raw, and then it snapped. Trump slammed his hand flat against the table, the sound echoing across the hall like a gunshot. "This is fake. All of it. She's making this up," he thundered, his voice rattling the microphones. "Disgusting lies." The audience jolted. Gasps erupted. Some booed, some shouted, but all eyes were on the man at the center of it all, a president who looked more shaken than powerful. And then Ivanka leaned forward, her voice, normally controlled and polished, came out sharp, almost shrill. "This is an outrageous attack," she said, pointing across the table at Jasmine. "This is slander, and it's beneath you. How dare you insult our family like this?" Her hands gestured wildly, her face flushed. For someone who had always been praised for her composure, this was a side of Ivanka the public rarely saw. But Jasmine, she didn't move. She didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her expression calm. And that calmness only made the Trumps look even more out of control. The contrast was stark. On one side, Trump pounding the table, Ivanka raising her voice, both of them visibly rattled. On the other side, Jasmine Crockett poised, steady, letting their anger do the work for her. Finally, she spoke, her tone cool and precise. "Mr. President," she said softly, her voice carrying through the studio like a blade slicing the air. "Your reaction says more than I ever could." The room went still again. Trump shifted in his seat, leaning forward, his eyes blazing. No, what says more is that you're a liar," he barked. A liar who shouldn't even be on this stage. But the more he shouted, the weaker his words sounded. The cracks were showing. The audience could hear it. They could see it. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, letting a small silence hang in the air before answering. If I were lying, Mr. President, you wouldn't be this angry. You'd simply show the truth. The crowd stirred. Some clapped softly. Others whispered to each other. You could feel it. The momentum was shifting again, sliding further and further out of Trump's grasp. Ivanka jumped in, her voice sharp. You're disrespectful. You're dangerous. This is nothing but a stunt. But Jasmine just looked at her with the same steady gaze. No, she replied, her voice steady as stone. What's dangerous is pretending that questions don't matter. What's dangerous is pretending that power can't be challenged. The words hit hard. Ivanka's mouth opened to respond, but for a moment, just a brief telling moment, she had nothing. Trump pounded the table again, trying to drown out the silence. You're disgusting. Attacking my family. This is the lowest thing I've ever seen. The audience watched, caught between shock and awe. Never had they seen the president this flustered, this visibly shaken. And Jasmine wasn't even raising her voice. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her calmness deliberate, her composure unshakable. This isn't an attack, she said clearly. This is accountability. And accountability doesn't stop just because you don't like it. The applause came suddenly, breaking the silence like a wave crashing against a cliff. It wasn't everyone, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to show that the audience was beginning to take sides. Trump's face twisted with frustration. He waved his hand dismissively, his words tumbling out quickly, almost sloppily. You're making this up, you're twisting facts, you're disgusting. But his voice cracked again, and the more he shouted, the smaller he seemed. Jasmine didn't need to shout back. She didn't need to pound the table or wave her hands. Her strength was in her stillness, her composure. She let him unravel, and in that unraveling, the audience saw everything. The host looked uneasy, glancing between the two sides, unsure whether to step in or let it play out. But he didn't move. He didn't say a word. And that silence gave Jasmine the space to strike again. Mr. President, she said, her voice calm, even gentle. This is not about insults. This is not about hate. This is about truth. And truth doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people watching right now. The audience erupted once more, this time louder, stronger. Cheers mixed with applause, the energy undeniable. Trump sat back, fuming, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. Ivanka shook her head, whispering sharply into his ear. But the damage had been done. They had lost control, and Jasmine hadn't even raised her voice. The cameras caught everything. The fury on Trump's face, the cracks in Ivanka's composure, and Jasmine sitting steady in the storm, refusing to be moved. And in that moment, it was clear. The balance of power in the room had shifted. The Trumps were no longer commanding the stage. Jasmine Crockett was. The studio had turned into something no one expected. What started as a heated debate had become a stage where truth and power collided, and the truth was winning. The applause that had broken out after Jasmine's calm words still echoed faintly through the room. Some audience members clapped softly, others stood, and a few even shouted their support. Trump sat stiff in his chair, his lips pressed tightly together, his jaw locked, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. For the first time all night, he was silent. Jasmine saw it. Everyone saw it. The man who had built his brand on being the loudest voice, the one who never backed down, was staring straight ahead, looking smaller than he ever had in the public eye, and Jasmine knew this was her moment. She leaned forward, her hands resting gently on the desk, her tone calm but carrying the weight of something far greater than herself. This isn't just about me, she said. The audience stilled again. The clapping stopped. People leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word. This isn't just about you, Mr. President, she continued, turning her gaze toward Trump, who sat frozen, staring back with narrowed eyes. This is about every single person watching right now who has ever been told they don't belong. It's about every child who has been asked, "Are you really American?" just because of the color of their skin. It's about families who have been made to feel small, made to feel less just because someone in power decided to question their worth. The room fell into silence, a silence so heavy it was almost suffocating. Even the hum of the studio lights seemed to fade. Jasmine's voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It stayed calm, but each word was sharper than the last, cutting through the air like a blade. You tried to make this about my identity, she said, her eyes never leaving Trump's. You tried to erase me with a sentence, but I am here. I was born here. I was raised here. I have worked my entire life to serve this country, and no amount of yelling from that chair will ever change that truth. The audience shifted. Heads nodded. Some whispered. Others sat frozen, unable to look away. Trump opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. His lips tightened, his eyes darting toward the host, perhaps looking for rescue. But the host didn't move. The camera stayed locked on Jasmine, and she pressed on. While we're talking about family, let's talk about privilege. Because here's the truth. You've lifted up your daughter, giving her more influence in this country than the First Lady herself. You've allowed her to sit in on meetings with world leaders, to speak for this nation in ways no daughter has ever done before. And when people question it, you call them liars. You dismiss them. But the truth is obvious. Everyone sees it, and everyone deserves an answer. The crowd buzzed, whispers rushing through the seats like a current. Jasmine paused just long enough to let the words settle, then she leaned in again. This is not hate. This is not revenge. This is accountability. And accountability does not bow down to family ties or personal comfort. It asks questions. It demands answers. It doesn't stay silent when silence protects the powerful. Clapping started again, hesitant at first, then stronger, rolling through the audience in waves. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned her gaze back to Trump. Her eyes steady, her voice firm. You once joked that if Ivanka weren't your daughter, you'd be dating her. You said it on television. You said it in interviews. And now you want us to believe that her role in your administration is simply business as usual? No, Mr. President, the American people deserve better than that. They deserve honesty. They deserve transparency. They deserve leadership that doesn't confuse family loyalty with national duty. The applause grew louder, stronger, filling the studio with energy. Someone shouted, "That's right!" from the back row. Another clapped so hard it echoed above the rest. Trump tried to wave it off, tried to laugh again, but the sound was hollow. The audience wasn't with him anymore, and Jasmine, calm as ever, delivered the final blow. America does not belong to one man. It does not belong to one family. It does not belong to one color, one class, or one background. America belongs to all of us, and no president, no matter how powerful, has the right to decide who counts as American and who does not. The words landed like thunder. The room exploded. The audience leapt to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even shouting Jasmine's name. The energy was electric, unstoppable. Trump sat in silence, his face red, his body rigid, his usual confidence replaced with something the cameras picked up all too clearly. Defeat. Ivanka leaned toward him, whispering furiously, her eyes darting nervously at the roaring crowd. But it was too late. The night didn't end with Trump's booming voice. It didn't end with Ivanka's polished defense. It ended with Jasmine Crockett, calm, steady, unshaken, turning what started as a personal attack into something much larger, a statement, a warning, a reminder that no matter how powerful someone may appear, the truth, spoken with courage, will always find its way through. And as the cameras cut to black, it was clear to everyone who had really owned the stage that night. Not the president. Not his daughter, but Jasmine Crockett.